Hi, my name is David the Good. I am the author of Grow or Die, The Good Guide to Survival Gardening. I am also the author of Compost Everything, The Good Guide to Extreme Composting, and about a dozen other books I've kind of lost track of. I write gardening books and I practice what I preach. I am standing right now in our garden, and over the next little bit we're going to wander around and I'm going to show you what we did on our property. This whole system here is less than 11 months old, and this entire area was just a big patch of grass and weeds on really bad soil. Our climate is USDA zone 8B. We are in lower Alabama. We get a good bit of rainfall a year, probably 60 to 80 inches range depending on the year. But we have fast draining grit that is acid, and it is absolutely terrible. Yet we have a productive garden. We have a lot of food coming in, and today I'm going to show you how I did it and how we keep things simple and we grow our food a lot like our ancestors used to grow food. And you can do this too, no matter where you are. So first of all, these are our trellis beans right here. These are velvet beans, which are a medicinal. This is a really weird medicinal plant. It is a testosterone booster. I have 9 children and 1 on the way. It has nothing at all to do with these beans. Don't look at these beans anymore. That's enough. But we grow our medicinals and we grow our crops right together. They also have dopamine precursors. If you want to look the variety up, it's called Mucuna pruriens, the velvet bean. Variety is Utilis. And it is a medicinal. Dopamine precursors mean you feel happy, and it boosts testosterone, which makes you awesome. So that's it for that. This bed right here, right alongside, you can see this stuff growing, right? This is not actually a crop. Yeah, there are beans on it. These are black-eyed peas, but these are improving the soil. This time of year, this is the summer, we basically get a really good spring growing season and a good fall growing season when it's cool. Right now it is hot and humid and the bugs and everything are terrible, and pretty much most of your vegetables that you plant early in the year kick off. So what you do is you throw down cover crops and you build the soil back up in between. This way, this is going to be carbon and nitrogen going into the ground. This is a combination of some sorghum grass and some black-eyed peas. If I wanted to have a bed take a rest and build up during the winter time of year, I would plant cool season stuff like mustards, lentils, chickpeas, fava beans, winter rye, winter wheat. It depends on how far north you get, what you're going to plant. We have basically a subtropical, borderline temperate climate where we do get freezes, but it doesn't get super cold. It doesn't stay cold for long enough to kill all of the greenery, but the further north you get, the harder it is to get cover crops that go all the way through. But it's important to build the soil up in between. And you'll notice these are not raised beds in the sense of building square, lumber beds or putting in bricks or something like that. We don't have aquaponic systems. We don't have complicated, gadgety stuff. What we do is we dig the ground up, we figure out how wide we want our bed. These are about 3-foot beds with about 1.5 wide paths. This is a little tight, but this is the area we use to grow small vegetables. And then we set up trellises that we can also take down again. These trellises are a design from Josh Satin. This is called the Trellis to Make You Jealous. And it's a little overkill. You don't really need trellises that are this complicated, but they are nice and they last for a long time. You really, if it was a grid down type of a thing, you could really just go and get sticks and stick sticks in the ground and grow your beans up them or something like that, or use your corn as trellises. But this sort of a system right here is really nice when we can get it. So these are just for small vegetables. Right now these guys are pole beans that are going to be coming in again. Everything is really beat by the heat and humidity, so this is not pretty, but this is about the 3rd round of beans that we planted this year, and as the season cools off and they it gets below the 90s, they're going to be a little happier. These beds are mostly just cleaned out and waiting for the next bit of season to come along. While we are waiting for the next season to come, we kind of make sure that the weeds don't take over and fill everything up with seeds, because that's important too. And in order to weed these things, we have what is called a wheel hoe, and I think we left it in the garden somewhere. So when we find it, I'll show you how it works. This is a family garden. I have no idea where everything is. So come on, wander through with me. This is the last bed here. You can see this bed is again covered with cover crops. Now I could get a yield of some dry beans out of here if I want to, or we can shell these out. For real cheap cover crops, we just go to the grocery store and we get black-eyed peas in the bag, dry beans in the bag, throw them down, and when it's hot and humid and miserable, they actually make a really good cover crop, and they fix nitrogen. They have nitrogen on their roots, just like peanuts and other legumes. And so these guys here are repairing this bed. This bed previously grew summer squash earlier in the year, and then before that it had onions in it, so it's like rotating through. It gets hot, it gets miserable, we throw the beans down, we'll let the beans grow until probably next month, chop them down, use them for mulch on the ground, or throw them in the compost pile, and then we'll plant in our fall stuff. If you look over here, this is the beginning of the fall gardens. This doesn't look like much of anything except a patch of bare dirt, but this area already grew us cabbages earlier in the year, followed by grain corn. I grow grain corn because it's storable, and sweet corn is like a nice snack, but it's not the kind of corn used for flour. And you can see there are beans coming in here. These are growing up right here. This is a new variety we're testing. We're looking for dry bean varieties right now that can take the heat, the rain, and the humidity. That is a big problem here. So we're doing some trials of different varieties at this point to see which things are going to take off and which aren't. These are dragon tongue beans. Those are black cocoa bush beans. Further down we have some other varieties, pink-eyed purple hull beans, which should do well because they're a type of black-eyed pea. But the beans are basically storable calories. These are ones that we're trying to get dry beans out of, but because of our excessive rainfall, it's really hard to get good dry beans. They tend to just kind of rot and mold on the pod. So you could see this dirt is terrible. This, you'd like to say it's a sandy loam, but it's really pretty much just sandy grit. It's powdery. The organic matter content when we tested it was less than 2%. It was lacking almost every important nutrient. The only thing it was somewhat high in was aluminum, and aluminum is not great. So by spreading things out like we have here, we've got these bean rows 3 foot apart, you're actually getting you get a better yield for the space because it is pulling the nutrients and water from a large area. When you have tight little beds, you have to feed them better, you have to water them more. We don't have to feed this very much, we don't have to water it very much. And if you want to get food for survival and work with really bad soil, go wider spacing. There's a reason those wide spacings exist, and it wasn't just because people were using tractors or mules and plows and stuff like that. It's actually because they were relying on the rain. So if you don't have you can hear the thunder right now. It may rain in the middle of this video, and then I don't have to water. So if you've got this wide spacing, the amount of moisture that's in the ground, there's like this bank of water, and there's this bank of nutrients. You've got less plants pulling from the reserve, so the food and water in the ground can be way less than if you put a bunch of plants together real tight. A lot of modern gardening is make a square out of wood, plant a bunch of stuff in it really tight with tons of compost, and make it like super amazing, and water it regularly, and put up sprinklers, or even worse, make an aquaponics system where you have all these complicated pipes and pumps and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in traditional gardening, in our climate, And in most of the United States, you had wide spacing. Use the ground that you have wide. That way you're not out here having to go along with a hose or put sprinklers up or anything like that all the time. It allows you to take less fertility and less water and get a good yield on plants that, well, if they were planted tighter in this soil, they'd probably just die or fail to yield. So this is a really easy, simple way. And I like to grow organically. As you come further along, you can see how pretty the gardens start to get as we move to the pretty. I started with the ugly spots. So if you've tuned, the first few people were like, oh my gosh, that guy's gardens is terrible except for those weird testosterone beans. Otherwise it's horrible. Gosh, it's terrible. As we get further down here, it gets better. I promise you, it gets better. But the soil here being so bad from the beginning, I mean, it really is like construction dirt. So it's this constant fight to try and bring yields out of it. And we tend towards the organic end of the spectrum. I don't believe in spraying pesticides. I think generally if you have big pest problems, something is out of balance. Now, sometimes, like earlier this year, we had an issue with squirrels. And the main problem that we found, the problem that was leading to so many squirrels, was that we had a serious lead deficiency in the garden. So once we got the lead deficiency rectified, we were able to bury all the squirrels, and the squirrels are now feeding the crops. There are times when something just comes in, but usually I don't like to rely on spraying anything. We like to go organic as possible, but with the soil being this bad and us wanting to get yields of food, not knowing how the country's going to go or how weird things are going to get, having mouths to feed, having work, your ideal idea, right, of like the perfect, you've got perfect compost and you've got animals that are chewing this thing up and they're going through a paddock, and then you garden over there, and then you build this amazing beautiful topsoil, and you do this awesome no-till system, and everything is really rich, and you're getting the most nutrient dense perfect food, and you don't have any pests because the nutrition levels are so high and it's so awesome. That's imaginary. It does happen. You can build those kind of systems, but to build an incredible garden really quickly that way and have it be successful, you really got to know what you're doing. There's a big learning curve, and it really helps if you start with good soil. We started with horrible soil, and when we first planted the first few things in here, we had pest issues like you would not believe, like these itty-bitty little black things. They weren't flea beetles, but they're similar. They looked like little tiny crickets, and they would chew on the leaves all the time. And cutworms were knocking down the sprouts, and it was just like, oh my gosh, man. So we made a mix of micronutrients and macronutrients based on the work of gardening author Steve Solomon, who is a friend of mine. He wrote the book Gardening When It Counts. If you don't have that book, Gardening When It Counts, definitely get that one. After you get my book, Grow or Die, The Good Guide to Survival Gardening, definitely get Steve's book. He made a fertilizer called Complete Organic Fertilizer, and then later he changed that and added more micronutrients because he realized trying to do everything organically, you may be missing some elements that are vital to your health, like molybdenum, or selenium, or silver. There's like little bits of things that you're missing. And so he wrote a second book after that one called The Intelligent Gardener, where he expanded on Complete Organic Fertilizer and made it no longer completely organic by the government's regulations, but there's a ton of micronutrients in there. So what we did was we tilled the ground up, we made our beds, we marked off where the beds are going to be, and we have these gently mounded beds, and then we burned piles of wood from all these woods around us. We just wood and weeds, and then we extinguished those fires, which gave us biochar or charcoal. We extinguish the fire when everything's starting to get red and glowing and it starts to turn white around the edges. You blast it out with a hose. Then we took that charcoal and we soaked it in barrels with micronutrient solutions. So like Dynagrow, Miracle Grow, whatever, all the micronutrients are in there. You pour it in there. If you could use fish emulsion and urine and all kinds of stuff. Whatever you want that's got a high level of nutrients in it that charcoal can soak up. And then we took that charcoal and we turned it into the ground all through here. So if you look in these beds, there's little bits of charcoal everywhere. So instead of trying to make enough compost to cover, we've got actually about 11,000 square feet of garden space, so roughly a quarter acre, a little over a quarter acre. Instead of trying to balance all of that and make enough compost for this space, we wanted to get food quickly. But the other problem of having this hot, humid, miserable, weird climate is that compost doesn't stick around. If we throw compost on the ground, it goes back to sand. In a short period of time, you're looking at sand again. And we're fighting geology. In some places, organic matter sticks very easily in the ground, and it's really nice and it looks good. But in other places, like here, where we get lots of rain and it's hot and humid, organic matter breaks down really quickly. So this is the key. The charcoal, putting charcoal in the ground is based on what has been discovered in the Amazon, terra preta soils. Terra preta or terra preta are ancient soils that were discovered all over the Amazon, where the soil over here is really, really bad, and then you go over here and suddenly there's this awesome soil, and it's rich and it's crumbly and it's really black, and it grows anything without fertilizer, and it looks amazing. And as they dug into the soil to try and figure out what it was, they found it had lots and lots of carbon in it from fires, and it had lots of pieces of broken pottery and bone fragments and all the aspects of having been created by somebody for some reason, whether it was a big trash dump or whether they made it on purpose. The fertility stuck around in the ground for a long time. In a sense, the charcoal is kind of acting like a long-term compost in the ground. It's a sponge. It holds nutrients and it releases the nutrients to the plants. So what we were doing was we were fast forwarding by taking a solution of nutrients, throwing the burned charcoal into it, and soaking it up, just letting it soak for 2 or 3 weeks and then turning it into the ground. And we did a set of test beds over here. Now you can't see them anymore, but this whole area here, earlier in the year, we had multiple squares, 5 foot by 5 foot squares. And we set up 12 of them. And we tested different amendments. We put compost and mulch in one of them. We put the biochar soaked with nutrients in another one. We put just 10-10-10 fertilizer in another one. And we took Steve Solomon's micronutrient mix, which is a different thing from the micronutrients that we threw into the charcoal, and we put that on another one. And what we found was the plots that had the charcoal and the plot that had all the micronutrients, both of those had the additional micronutrients in them. They both produced excellent flavored vegetables that were larger and sweeter and better than expected. We're talking like radishes that are very sweet and delicious, growing in some of the worst ground ever. And we had radishes growing right next to them with 10-10-10 as a fertilizer, and they were small, shriveled, bitter, and disgusting. Like we didn't even want to eat them. Got radishes that are this big, that are so sweet and delicious you actually want to eat it as a vegetable. And that's saying something, because radishes usually aren't great. Turnips that were sweet like fruit. It was cool. It was really cool. But we did it by testing them side by side, because I'm always going, okay, how can we test? How can we make better? My last homestead, we had beautiful volcanic clay loam that would grow anything, and it tasted great, and it was wonderful. And then I ended up, by God's providence, ending up on a piece of the worst soil. This is the worst soil that I've ever gardened in, and I grew up in South Florida where we had sand. This is horrible stuff. Not only is it acid and lacking organic matter, it's high draining, and it also gets hard further down. It's terrible stuff. But when we put in the charcoal and we put in micronutrients, it made a big difference on the flavor. So, first of all, this sort of stuff is going to shut down. If everything gets bad, you're not going to be able to grab micronutrients. So if you look up on my website, thesurvivalgardener.com, look up Steve Solomon and micronutrients, and you'll see the mix that he made for my soil. And also check out The Intelligent Gardener and you'll get an idea of how we did it. We gathered together all the materials ahead of time. I bought bags of extra amendments, and some of them are kind of expensive, but we want to make sure that our teeth stay intact and our health is high, and we're getting the nutrients and building the garden now, so in the future, if we can't get that stuff, well, we'll maintain it on compost or manure or whatever else we need to. But to begin with, we wanted to get everything we could in here for nutrition. Now right here, you'll see that I'm standing on bare soil. There are bare paths in the garden. And if I could find that thing, where's that thing? Where's that thing? Do you know where that thing is? The kids maybe took it for a ride somewhere or something. We're gonna find it. We are gonna find it. You know what a wheel hoe looks like, kids? Where's my wheel hoe? I don't know, the kids probably put it away. That would be like amazing, because it's usually just sitting out here. I will superimpose a photo of a wheel hoe right here. There. That's what a wheel hoe looks like. It's a great tool. And so when you have a larger garden, like we have here, we've got these pathways, and these are long runs. And if you're doing single rows, like we're doing in the other parts of the garden, having these long runs here, if I take a regular hoe and I just go along and I scrape the ground up with a regular hoe, and I'm just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, it takes some effort. But with a wheel hoe, I just walk it. I'll just walk it right down and push it, and it's super, super easy. So it's simple technology, but it's way more reliable than, say, a tiller. And also, people will tell you, you've got to deep mulch. You've got to no-till. Look it, your first priority is getting food. Don't let the cultists get you. There are many ways to get food. You can get good food with deep mulching. You can do no-till and get good food. You can till and get good food. You have to pay attention to what your plants want and keep them happy, and your results are going to vary from climate to climate to climate. To mulch 11,000 square feet is insane. I live in a rural area. I mean, look, there's no neighbors here. The tree companies are not dropping mulch chips in my neighborhood. You can't get them. I mean, I guess I could get a chipper and mulch the woods, but it's crazy. We're talking 11,000 square feet. We're talking, I don't know, like 15, 20 truckloads maybe to cover this whole area. And then it's just gonna rot out. But not only that, because we have serious heat and humidity and pest issues in the deep south, the mulch may become a breeding ground for insects. I have a friend, and when it rains for a few days, she deep mulches her garden. When it rains for a few days, the bugs come up out of the mulch and they start eating all of her plants. She cannot plant seedlings out in her garden. Like, she can't plant from seed because the seedlings get eaten. She's got to wait until they get about this big and plant them out so they don't get completely destroyed by the stuff in the mulch. In other climates, the mulch is great and it builds great soil. I would do it around your fruit trees, but I wouldn't do it around this giant vegetable garden. First of all, it's production. So it's not about purity. If you have 10-10-10, use 10-10-10. If you got micronutrients, use some micronutrients. If you can make your own compost, make compost. We try to come up with simple solutions to fix things. This here, T-post and zip ties. And this trellis is not really being occupied by anything but this one single yam vine right now. But you can see the structure of this is super simple. And not only that, these pieces of cattle panel, I cut them at about my height, slightly higher than my height, and I leave part of the metal sticking out on the bottom, like the spikes sticking out. I cut it in the middle of these guys, so when I stick it in the ground and I push it in with my feet, it just stays still and it doesn't spin around here. That way I can use one T-post and it's cheaper. Right next to me here, we've got cassava growing. Cassava is a staple root crop from the tropics. If you're gonna focus on survival gardening, the best thing I would say to focus on for sheer calories are roots. Potatoes, turnips, yams, sweet potatoes, those kinds of things. Cassava, if you live down in the tropics, dasheen, you know, these things are great. Roots are big storable calories. These things will make huge roots for me. This yam will make big roots for me. The sweet potatoes down there are gonna make good roots for me. If you wanted to try and subsist on grain, you've really gotta know what you're doing, and it's a lot of labor. We tried growing patches of grain before to make our own bread. We ended up pretty much feeding most of it to the chickens because it was so much labor to get even enough to grind. Roots are like the key. And if you've got some beans for storable protein, that's good. I would pick beans, and for another grain, I would pick corn. I'm gonna count beans as a grain. They're grain-esque. They're small. Corn, but grain corn, not sweet corn. So if we wander through here, what I've done here, again, it looks like a mess because this is the summer. Everything's kind of suffering from the heat. I have mixed up species in between. This is a combination of an orchard and a food plot. It's vegetables and orchard together. They're 4-foot wide beds with 3-foot wide pathways. And there's all kinds of food in here. It's not screamingly obvious that it's food, but like down here, I've got raspberries, and I have a cat we can eat if we need to, and got raspberries. Oh, you're not getting her. And then up here, this is chaya, Mexican tree spinach. Mexican tree spinach is a really good green. And then over here, these are angle gourds, which are a relative of squash and cucumbers that is like just amazing for the South. It's a Southeast Asian vegetable, so when everything else is kicking off like it is this time of year, this is our in-between time when everything looks ugly. When everything is kicking off, these guys are still producing, and they are a lot like a summer squash. Very, very delicious. I'm sure I've got some over here. Come on around, we'll see if we can find one. This one's a little smaller. Chase the bugs off it. This is a angle gourd. It's in the same family as loofah. It doesn't have the multi-purpose nature of loofah, but it's a real scrappy plant. And you could see I put a ribbon on here because this one is being saved for seed. The amount of seeds produced by this one right here are going to be enough to get us through the entire next year's worth of harvests. I mean, if we only get 1 or 2 of these, we're talking like 100 seeds. And I think I planted about 4 or 5 seeds at the base of this cattle panel trellis just to get this thing going. And they're kind of spreading. This one right here, this is eating size. You just skin the outside of it and cook it, and it's delicious. It soaks up whatever flavor of whatever you want. This is Florida cranberry, also known as Jamaican sorrel. This is both a leaf crop and it makes a tart fruit that makes a really good faux cranberry sauce. We can't grow cranberries down here, but we can grow these things. They're in the hibiscus family, related to okra and hibiscus. Persimmon, Japanese persimmon. So in the other part of the garden, those were just standard little vegetable gardens, the little 3-foot wide beds where you had some pathetic looking beans coming up right now because, again, it's the wrong time of year. All gardening demonstrations should be filmed at the end of May, period. But here we go. It's August in Alabama. What are you going to get? So these beds here now are different. These are a no-till system. This is a polyculture. This is basically strips of food forest. I call this method grocery row gardening, and I put a little booklet out on it this year because I'm so excited about how well it works. It's a combination of trees and herbs and food and stuff together. But this being a polyculture, we're not going to get like a huge amount of one thing out of here, like huge production of potatoes. If you wanted maximum potato production, you better just plant a field full of potatoes. But if you want a bit of okra, you want some beans, you want some spinaches, you want some roots, you want some fruits and some apples and some berries and some herbs and some stevia and some cut flowers or whatever else, this is the system for that. This is a polyculture, which means There's so many plants in here that the pests get absolutely confused. They have no idea what to do in here. There's spiders in here, and there's butterflies in here, and there's bees in here, and there's praying mantises and stick bugs and toads. And so when the pests come in here, they're like, I think I wandered into the wrong neighborhood. And they go over to the row gardens and they try to eat my stuff there. And this is just this huge mix of food, and this is based on permaculture ideas. And so when I wrote the book on it, I kind of explained, like, there's a time for a method like this, and a small backyard where you just basically want to go shopping in your backyard, you're not going to get like super maximum production on any one thing unless you deliberately plant a bunch of that into the rows. But you're going shopping and you're getting a wide range of food all through the year. So here we have chase tree, which is a medicinal, and then we have okra, which is edible, and then we have our black-eyed peas making pods right here. These are fixing the ground, and they're making beans. They throw them back in. We've got hot peppers right in here. It looks like a confusing mess. So if somebody came into my garden, they would get confused. They would think, there's no food in there. You know, but there's actually tons of food in here. Jerusalem artichokes. We have the angle gourds, blackberries, eggplants. We've gotten a lot of eggplants. This is a little tender white type that I've decided I really, really like. You pick them when they're small. There's chaya. These guys are canna lilies. Canna lilies are a common ornamental plant. I use them to grow mulch right in place. They're just here just to build the system up. This is a pear. When that gets bigger, these things will be pruned to fit into this space and kept small. These pears are not getting giant, so I know when you say pear, people freak out, but it's not going to get that big. There's more chaya in here. There were tomatoes in here earlier in the year, and cabbages. Right now we're getting the sweet potato vines starting to run all over the place. This up here was a whole set of beans that we grew just for seed. You can see some of the remnants of the pods here. This is a variety I wanted more seed from, so we grew them out. More of those right here growing out. They're called yard-long beans. As the canna lilies get big, they get chopped down and fed to the ground so we can get our humus back. Even though we do have charcoal in here, it's always good to have more compost. This is an easy way to compost. Just chop stuff up and feed it back into the system. There are daylilies in here. These are mayhaws, which make a nice little fruit. More cannas. Keep getting fed back in. There's an apple right here. There's an apple right here. There are asparagus hiding in here. There's a passion fruit right here. This actually planted itself. I have no idea how it got in there. Some bird probably dropped the seeds. There's sweet potatoes over here. And this is not its prettiest. I mean, earlier in the year, this was absolutely incredible. Let's go around the corner so you can see what the next row looks like, because it's kind of a different experience. Each row I have given a round of different things to. Like right here, we've got strawberries growing around the base of some okras. And then right here, this is a pomegranate. So the strawberries and the okra, they've got different levels. Pomegranate, a fruit, okra, a vegetable, and then strawberries, a berry. Cassava. Look at the size of this pepper plant. These are cayennes. We've been making our own hot sauce because when the apocalypse comes, you gotta have hot sauce. I think we better get in and out of the rain. Let's go find some place where we could sit. Okay, so I got a sensible sized mug of coffee here, and I'm sitting on the porch because it's raining. And I'm going to finish this thing up and give you some ideas to take away. First of all, if you have bad soil, you're gonna have to do something to it to make it work for you. If it's really acid, you should lime. If it's really dry, you're gonna have to irrigate or space really widely and work with the rains. You can make your own compost. You can get, manure from your chickens. You can even dilute urine. You can throw down ashes, whatever you need to do to feed it. because plants just don't do well. You'll notice, you know, when seedlings come up and they're yellow right from the beginning, sometimes they start to go to seed or to mature really quickly when they're tiny. I remember when I was a kid growing up in South Florida, I grew this cantaloupe plant. I planted some cantaloupe seeds, like from a store-bought cantaloupe probably. And this little cantaloupe vine grew, and it grew about this long, and it made leaves that were about this big. And then it flowered. I couldn't believe it. It flowered. It was so cool. And it made a cantaloupe. The cantaloupe was this big. It was the saddest, silliest little cantaloupe on this shriveled little yellowy vine. And when I cut it open when it was ripe, or I thought it was ripe, it didn't taste particularly good, but it had a few full-size seeds in it, which cracked me up. The seeds were like that big. I mean, the seeds are like taking up almost the whole middle. I just need to perpetuate myself for another generation. So anyhow, what happens is if you don't feed and water well right from the beginning, the plants sometimes go into what is called senescence. That means they reach old age early, and that's not good. So if whatever you can get to feed, just make sure that you feed. You can't just throw stuff in the ground usually and get good results. And when you're in between, if you have bad soil in particular, if you're in between crops, think about putting down some sort of cover crop. You know, winter rye, rye grain. Now, not just the grass rye, that's not particularly good. It doesn't have enough roots to it. Buckwheat, beans, peanuts. It depends on the time of year, if it's warm or a cool season, but there's tons of information on cover cropping. And what you're doing there is you're actually adding organic material to the soil. So you might not be able to make enough compost to take a bad piece of ground and cover the whole thing with compost. That's actually really, really hard to do if you just make piles and try to get enough compost. Say if you want a good-sized survival garden, forget it. But what you can do is go and get yourself some cheap beans, buckwheat seeds, you know, wheat or whatever. Throw it all over the area. Fertilize it with whatever you got. You got 10, 10, 10, triple 13, doesn't matter. Get that stuff growing. Get that stuff growing, keep it alive. Get it nice and big and thick, and then chop it or till it all under. Or chop it and till it under. And what you're doing then is you're adding all that material to the ground, and it will rot down into the ground, particularly if you do it at the right time, when it's good and green, and it hasn't started to get browned out yet. That stuff will rot down in the soil, and all the roots that have gone down into the ground, the roots can go 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, depends on your soil and how hard it is. Those roots now will rot into the ground, and they will put humus in. So don't think like you're not stuck with tiny little beds. You don't have to be stuck with tiny little beds because you don't have any compost to go further. Grow your compost in place. I grow a ton of stuff in my grocery row gardens that's just there to chop up and throw on the ground like the cannas. They're constantly getting chopped up and thrown on the ground to rot. I can't keep enough compost on those beds. So think about feeding and watering first of all. If you don't have adequate irrigation or the ability to irrigate, wide spacing. Look up dry farming techniques. It's incredible. You think as a backyard gardener often that you got to have your hoses, you got to have drip lines and all that kind of stuff. No, if you can break up more ground and spread out wider, you will be able to grow food in conditions that you probably didn't think you could. I mean, we could go, you know, a few weeks without having to go out there with a hose. And people that are really good at it, they can go the entire season without having to irrigate. And if you do get enough rainfall, you know, take advantage of the rain. Then you don't have to rely on any kind of centralized system or set up a well or anything like that. But learn how to do those things. Don't be afraid to bust out of the little bed and go wide and let the plants have tons of elbow room, and they can take care of themselves a lot better than when they're crammed on top of each other. Also, you don't need raised beds with lumber. I mean, look at the price of lumber. If you spend the money to put in a bunch of raised beds, gosh, you would have been much better just buying some old silver dollars or something and burying them in your backyard. Because really all you need to do is fork up the ground, dig your pads out a little bit, throw that loose soil on top of the beds, make these nice little mounded beds. I've got these little mounded beds. I've been doing that for years. And those, just loose soil. All you need is loose dirt. I mean, you don't see commercial farms with all these. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine driving through the Midwest and it's just a ton of 4x8 beds stretching off to the horizon? I mean, you'd have to cut down all the trees in the eastern seaboard to grow, you know, a a bed of corn out there, some of these, 1,000-acre farms, 10,000 acres. Oh man, we can't grow corn. We gotta go build some of those raised beds. No, you don't need it. Simple, 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 simple. Try to keep it simple. Look to what our ancestors did and grow that way. Spread things out. You don't need complicated systems. Simpler is the better. Another thing to keep in mind is the more you mix species up and the more varieties you grow together, if it looks like a big mess to you and it looks like a big mess to your neighbors, you know what you planted. So there's a couple of benefits to this. I've got plants out there that you should cook before eating. I've got plants out there that are medicinal. I've got plants out there that may or may not be toxic unless they're cooked. I have plants out there that are for medicine, and plants that are out there that I'm going to dig the roots on, and plants that are there that are for whatever. I grow all kinds of stuff. Some of them are just compost. It looks like a big mess. When people come into my yard, they go, "What is this? What is this? What is this? It looks like a forest. It looks like a jungle." Yeah, it's a jungle of food. So it's harder for a thief coming through my yard. They might recognize a few things, but there's a lot of stuff. If things got really bad, it would just look like, what a mess. I have no idea what this is. And I'm growing crops nobody's heard of. I mean, come on, angle gourds, cassava, Mexican tree spinach. You could plant some niche stuff that people don't know about. But the more you mix it up, forget human thieves or anything else. Just in general, the more you mix all your crops up and your varieties up, the better ecosystem you're creating. So you have a very complicated ecosystem. If you go into the average woods, there's a bunch of different species all living together in the woods. It's not just one thing planted in rows. When you have a whole bunch of the same thing, you end up with big plague events. It's like in the city. When the Black Death goes into the city, a bunch of people get it. They're all packed in right tight next to each other like sardines. But the more you spread things out, the less these plague issues could become a problem. So if, say, one of your peach trees got infected with a peach borer. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. If you had a peach orchard, it could spread all the way through. But if you have a peach tree, and then you have a patch of sweet potatoes, then you got some berries, then you got a fig, then you got an apple, then you got some more berries, then you got your wife's flower garden, and then you've got another peach tree, the bugs are way, way, way less likely to jump peach to peach. Also, if you have different varieties of plants, you've got a system that's a big polyculture, you might have a late frost one year. Your early blooming fruit trees might lose all their blooms. Your later blooming fruit trees will still bloom. You might get a really cold winter. Some of the stuff that can tolerate higher chill hours, that is, hours of cold below 40 degrees, they might bloom just fine that year and do great. Some of your other plants might bloom early and lose all their blooms, or they might not even come out of dormancy properly. So if you've got a bunch of different stuff growing together, even say, don't just plant one variety of apple. Oh gosh, I love fill-in-the-blank apple. I love Fuji apples. No. Plant a Fuji, plant a Granny Smith, plant a Arkansas Black Spur, plant a Northern Spy. Plant all these different varieties of apples, because some are going to have disease issues, some are going to get damaged by frost, other ones won't. Some will come out of dormancy early, some will have low chill, some have high chill. If the earth gets hotter, some of them are going to do fine. If we go into ice age now, other ones are going to do fine. So you've got your mix. Even inside of it, don't just plant one variety of bean, plant 3 or 4 different varieties of beans. Because some are going to do better certain years than other things. You don't know how much rain you're going to get, what the disease resistance is going to be, how cold it's going to be, how warm it's going to be. So the more you mix it up, the better. And the more you mix it up, the less problem you have with pests. So it makes it confusing to everything, but it also builds a lot of redundancy into the system. I don't ever grow, like I'm just going to grow this one thing. I only grow one variety of this thing ever. Now I'm always mixing it up. Like right now we've got 5 or 6 varieties of beans growing. We had 5 or 6 varieties of tomatoes this year, 5 or 6 varieties of peppers. I've got 3 varieties of cassava. I've got multiple different types of berries. I even planted different types of canna lilies, even though it doesn't really matter. And I figured out which one was my favorite and did the best this year, and I'm going to plant more of that one. You learn as you go along. And again, you got bad soil, some things are going to thrive in it. There's certainly something that can grow in your soil. find out whatever is related to the weeds that grow in your backyard and see if you can grow that, right? I mean, there's going to be something that thrives in your area, and one of the best ways you could figure out how to garden in your area is to go find old gardeners in your area and farmers and ask them, what do you grow? What's easy? Can I grow that? Do you have extra seeds? Can I learn from you? Can I go, can I cut your lawn? Make friends, share extra seeds. Go get an idea of what grows in your area, because I'll tell you what, you can go read a gardening book and the author might be from New York or California and you might be living in Arkansas, and if you take all the details of, well, this tomato always grows great for me and this does great for me, and you go and you do that, it's probably not going to work the same way as it is in the book. The book doesn't apply to all climates and all situations. You can have different soil from neighborhood to neighborhood or even from house to house. So the closer you can get to local knowledge, the better off you're going to be. I hope that today I've given you some general principles that'll help you out, how to get a place into some sort of shape right from the beginning. Just till, get your stuff together to feed, plant a bunch of different varieties of seeds, see which things do well, plant them again. Don't bother with all the fiddly details. Use hand tools that make sense. Keep it simple. Rely on the rainfall as much as possible. These things will get you through, and you will learn as you grow, because there's no substitute for actually growing. You really need to grow. Don't be afraid. Just plant a bunch of stuff and see what happens. I mean, there's a lot of people you can learn from, but you also can learn from yourself as you go along. So I'm hoping the general principles I give you will give you a bit of a philosophy of gardening that will take you through no matter what happens. And I appreciate you joining me today and getting stuck in the rain and then going and sitting on the porch back here with a cup of coffee. I appreciate it. If you want to learn more about what I do, you can check out my YouTube channel, David the Good. It's up for now, and I don't know how the future is going to go or what's going to happen, but if you don't trust that YouTube is going to stick around forever, which nothing sticks around forever, you can also get my books. I write more in-depth in my books, and I try to put in a lot of illustrations and make it simple, make it understandable for people. So Grow or Die, Compost Everything, Free Plants for Everyone, The Good Guide to Plant Propagation. I've also written a few books on Florida gardening. I've written a book on my grocery row gardening system. It's called Grocery Row Gardening. And then you can, if you don't want to buy a book, that's fine. You can also check out my website. I've got like 2,500 articles that I've written there now. That is thesurvivalgardener.com. And may God bless you and keep you and your family. And until next time, may your thumbs always be green.